In recent years, we have seen a surge of gluten-free products. Now, in part, this is a response to the increased diagnosis and just awareness of celiac disease, but it's also been driven by a perspective that perceives that gluten-free equals healthier, leading many people to jump on the gluten-free bandwagon without medically needing to do so. In this video, we're going to dive into the world of gluten. We'll explore what it is, what it does, the benefits of a gluten-free diet for those who need it, some of the common misconceptions around it, and just provide a clear, more nuanced understanding of gluten as a whole. There's a lot of misinformation about gluten online, especially in social media, where gluten is frequently demonized. So let's unpack it. If all that sounds good to you, let's go. Hi folks, welcome to my channel or welcome back. My name is Kat. I'm a licensed and registered dietitian nutritionist, and on this channel I like to talk about weight inclusive and weight neutral focused approaches to health, as well as diving into scammy and, in my opinion, unethical nutrition related businesses, products, mostly nutrition related MLMs, and other fear mongering nutrition related claims. Now today we are talking about gluten. Let's start with what gluten actually is. So gluten is a protein that is found in things like wheat, barley, and rye, and the derivatives of wheat, barley, and rye. Now its role in something like bread, for example, is the texture, the ability to rise. It forms a kind of like gluten matrix. Gluten is actually a mixture of two proteins called glutenin and gliadin, but they're so intertwined together we just refer to it as gluten. Now for most people, gluten is a harmless kind of protein in their intake, but for some people, like those with celiac disease, it is not a helpful kind of protein. It can cause some serious issues down the line if someone with celiac disease continue to consume it, and it does so by causing some damage to what is called the microvilli in the small intestine. So our microvilli are like little tiny, if you can kind of think of them as like not really fingers, that sounds weird, but they're like little tiny fingers, and they're sitting on other like larger kind of fingers. They're not fingers, but you know what I'm trying to say. And that is how we're able to absorb the nutrients in the food that we eat. But if somebody does have celiac disease and they're consistently consuming gluten, that can cause some damage to the microvilli and can, second and third order effect, cause some issues with overall nutrition status. So to answer that first question of are gluten-free foods healthier? To people with celiac disease, absolutely. Gluten-free foods are necessary. And it's really exciting to see the increased amount of gluten-free options for people who can't consume gluten for medical reasons. For the general population, though, having a gluten-free diet is not necessary, though. So overall, I would say that gluten-free products, they're neutral. In some contexts, they can be really great. In some contexts, not so great. And that neutrality really helps us to approach it and see the context in which it is being consumed in. Now, as far as the nutritional quality in there, that is varied. It's important to note that some things are naturally gluten-free. They've always been gluten-free, and you'll see labeling on them that says gluten-free when there's not even a concern for them to even contain gluten. I've seen it on some potato bags, for example, where potatoes will say gluten-free when they are naturally gluten-free. But when I'm talking about specifically gluten-free products, what I'm referring to in this video is are those gluten-free alternatives to gluten-containing products, not necessarily foods that are naturally gluten-free, like blueberries, for example. Now, gluten-free products are not inherently more nutrient dense. It does not mean that they are lower in added sugar or higher in nutrients. It simply just means that it does not contain the gluten protein. And just because someone is on a gluten-free diet doesn't mean that they're meeting all of their nutritional needs. In fact, there are some nutrients of concern whenever I am working with someone who is on a gluten-free diet. For example, there are certain nutrients that you are at a higher risk of being deficient in. Because a lot of gluten-containing foods are actually fortified, sometimes the reduced consumption or the avoidance of gluten-containing foods can lead to some deficiencies. When someone is diagnosed with celiac disease, a lot of doctors will refer them to a registered dietitian, or they should refer them to a registered dietitian in order for them to just kind of become more aware of what that looks like long term in a kind of sustainable way, that they're able to get variety and able to have intake of foods that are going to reduce the risk for any kind of deficiencies down the line. Now with this gluten myth, there is a message, a kind of idea that people can consume gluten when they're in other countries, for example in European countries, and not have any issues. Let's talk about this. According to the National Celiac Association, consumption of gluten, that is not safe for people with celiac disease to consume regardless of the origin of the gluten. Whether it's coming from Europe or in America, it is not recommended to consume the gluten. It's true that there are different varieties of wheats that have varying amounts of gluten in them, but that doesn't mean that it is safe or encouraged for someone with celiac disease to consume that. Even though it might be at a lower amount and they might feel a little bit better, there can still be damage to those microvilli. Now, it's important to note that the prevalence of celiac disease in Europe, for example, is similar to the prevalence in the United States. And the prevalence of celiac disease varies beyond regions, but it's not based on the amount of gluten consumed. Genetics play a role. So going back to the idea that sometimes people feel better when they are consuming gluten-containing foods in Europe, typically they're on holiday, they're on vacation, they're going to be at a reduced kind of stress level. We know that that directly impacts digestion. For example, we can see that in the sympathetic versus parasympathetic nervous system. We have the fight or flight versus rest and digest. When people are traveling, certainly the rest and digest can definitely play a role in that sympathetic nervous system. Stress can definitely impact digestion, leading to some of those not very helpful symptoms. Also in Europe, people are probably going to be doing a little bit more walking than they would in the States, which that also can help with digestion. Overall, having a more leisure-like day can play a role in digestion. So we really need to take that into consideration too when vacationing places, and we might find that our digestion is a little bit different. And so if when you are traveling, if you're feeling a little bit more of an enjoyable kind of experience, less stress, that's also going to play a role. Being relaxed can really help that digestion. It makes a big difference. That's one of the reasons why for my digestive health related clients, I will often recommend them to do something that we know activates the parasympathetic nervous system, because it plays a huge role in digestion. So it's not this some kind of magical thing about Europe. We have to look at the bigger picture and look at all the variables that can play a role in that. So gluten-free diets can be very nutrient dense. I mentioned a little bit earlier about those nutrients of concern. Typically with just a little bit of planning is doable for people who need to be on gluten-free diets to get the nutrients that they need, but certainly meeting with a health professional, meeting with a registered dietitian can help with the implementation of that, especially at the beginning, because those gluten-containing foods really do provide a variety of micronutrients, whether it's fortified or not. Gluten-free diets can absolutely meet nutrient needs. Might just need a little bit of planning, especially at the beginning. Popping in here with a couple of notes regarding gluten-free intake and the reduction of some IBS-related symptoms that some people experience when they reduce the amount of gluten that they're consuming. In people with irritable bowel syndrome or IBS, a gluten-free diet can be part of a kind of management plan of action or plan of care. Now, specifically, we see this in the implementation of a low FODMAP diet. Now, FODMAP diet is not meant to be long-term. What it stands for is fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. You don't have to remember that, but basically those are different kind of carbohydrate chains, and gluten-free products often contain something called fructan, that kind of chain. The exclusion of gluten in a FODMAP diet is not related to the gluten itself, because the gluten is protein. It's related to the carbohydrate chains that are so often tied to those gluten-containing foods, specifically in this case fructans. And so some people find that if they have digestive related issues, they might go on a gluten-free kind of intake and find that they have a reduction in symptoms. But in my experience working with a lot of people, a lot of times it's not so much the gluten that's causing the reduction in symptoms, but it's a reduction in those high FODMAPs that are often found in gluten-containing foods. And even though that person might not do a full low FODMAP application or implementation, they still might be reducing a significant portion of the amount of overall FODMAPs in their intake. And so they may see some of that benefit. And so in that case, when I am working with digestive health clients who were doing a low FODMAP approach, there's a wider plan of action. We're not just implementing gluten-free and leaving that long term. There's different phases of the low FODMAP protocol, and there are other things that we can do outside of that to help support their digestive system overall so that they can reintroduce. The goal is to be able to reintroduce those high FODMAP foods down the line, because ultimately a lot of those high FODMAP foods are very beneficial, very supportive of an overall healthy digestive system. So just wanted to make a note of that. Let's continue on. In conclusion, while gluten-free diets are certainly necessary for some people, they are not a one-way ticket to better health for everybody. As with any other dietary choice, it is important to look at the overall consumption and not just focus in on the elimination of one specific specific thing. Also, before making any significant dietary changes, I really encourage you to consult with a healthcare provider, with a doctor, a registered dietitian to help with that tailoring and to ensure your nutrient needs are met. Now, I could not leave this without giving my absolute favorite snack bars, but I tried these bars one time and I fell in love with them. These are so good. If you are someone who needs to be gluten-free and you are looking for bars that are just so satisfying, in my opinion, you might not like them, that's okay. But these bars from Pamela's, the taste of just like chocolate and oats and coconut, they're just so good. I was obsessed with these during my pregnancy over 2 years ago, and I'm still obsessed with these. I eat one a day at least. I'm like not even joking. The local Walmart started carrying them and I was just buying them out. I think they started to carry more. I started seeing them carry more because I was buying them out. That's what I'm assuming at least. Part of me though is I get focused on like one specific kind of meal or one thing and I just really enjoy it and have it all the time until I get tired of it. I have not gotten tired of this for a couple years now. I love these so much. Just had to throw that out there in case you haven't tried these. I don't need to be gluten-free, but these bars, so good. And my toddler loves them as well. All right, that wraps it up for this video. Please leave a like if you liked it. Make sure you're subscribed. I would greatly appreciate that. And remember, you can strive for health without subscribing to diet culture. I'll see you later. Bye.